Sleep deprivation, grueling hours of isolation, and unnecessary prolonged stress is exerted on us by those who we are supposed to trust. This usually results in a confession, but does a confession equal the truth? The gruesome purgatory of an interrogation room emits fear and creates a false sense of security for a society's undeserving citizens. While this is not always the intention, the psychological interrogation tactics that are used under these debilitating conditions represent an ethical disconnect between the system and the public, crossing a line between authority and authoritarian, causing problems that still remain ignored. I realize that chaos is not something we strive for in life, and that is something we shouldn't want, but without these issues, we would never be able to realize how to strive to improve in such complicated realm. The mindless methods used by the police during an interrogation gives rise to troublesome concerns. Even as supposed measures are taken to prevent this, these concerns become problems that still remain and are even becoming more exceeding than can be simply controlled. Although sometimes disguised as time goes on, the consequences arising from these issues are quickly shifting from conformable to completely unmanageable. These unfortunate repercussions are then stepping stones that are building a bridge, ending in mistrust between a community and its police. The psychological interrogation tactics that encourage these debilitating conditions used by law enforcement should be changed when interviewing persons of interest because they represent an ethical disconnect between the system and the public, have been used with the sole want of gaining a confession in the wrong ways, and creates a fine line between life or death in some cases, not always resulting in the truth. Universally, a confession is treated as a way to compel evidence of guilt, whether valid or not, and is likely to dominate all other evidence during the conviction process. Once a confession is made, turning back is not much of an option despite what other evidence may point to. Although the justice system functions on rules to minimize wrongful convictions and incrimination, the tactics used by police for investigations and interrogations present an enormous, costly opportunity for error, something that typically goes unnoticed. As stated in a journal about psychological interrogation by Leo and Afshi, although likely not intentional, the forces are what actually lie behind the cause of these problems. This creates a vicious cycle of outrage that is followed by decades of work to put an end to these poor ways, only for them to begin again. The use of these tactics will build an unfavorable reputation for law enforcement, whether the intention is there or not. There is impropriety and misconduct involved in the psychological tactics that law enforcement use during an interrogation that cause long-term issues that accompany a seemingly harmless behavior. This results in a dissolved trust of faith in our trusted police force. Point blank, this needs to change. Although it has been proven effective to those who are guilty, sadly, it has a much larger effect on those who are not. In multiple cases, according to Deception in the Courtroom from the American Psychological Association, the courts have ruled that these deceptive tactics, along with a lengthy interrogation, all converge to overbear the defendant's will. They are combining these intricate tactics to contribute to an effective interrogation, but causes the defendant to become overwhelmed, which then ends in the police getting what on their agenda all along: a verbal confession. These wrongful tactics are explicitly a violation of American liberty and justice we are all promised. The moment the suspect steps into that interrogation room, they have already unwillingly relinquished their freedom of autonomy. At this point in the power struggle, police have already have the full advantage over the defendant, and they are not the only ones aware of the unmatched relationship. Not only does law enforcement have their immoral tendencies to back them up to push a confession, but in some cases they do have the trauma of the suspect. Some believe that a criminal will not readily confess without some sort of push, which is why the police use these techniques to push out a confession, no matter how hard it may be. This is especially easy when the person they are interviewing is under a great deal of stress and trauma from witnessing a disturbing affair. Individuals coming into an investigation are already nervous, and inflicting these techniques just make it far worse, but even better for the police. The brainwashing ability the police push onto their interviewee also comes from the pre-existing stress from being interrogated, making them more susceptible to be easily manipulated and persuaded. These suspects will say anything to get out of the situation and remove themselves from the added stress, making them more prone to agreeing with what the police say, no matter how credible the confession may be. These tactics are what are considered a legal form of torture, according to Mr. Riley from the Board of National Defense. As it is hopefully apparent, they will do anything and everything to reach what they desire: a confession. Now, are these ways intended to be wrong? Probably not, but are they still perceived as such? Absolutely. As it is hopefully clear, the line between coercion and manipulation is subtle, but important. Coercion typically involves a certain level of force or threats, whereas manipulation is convincing one to comply willingly. The object of every interrogation should be to learn the truth, but far too often subjects are coerced, and knowing when to draw the line is of paramount importance and can be the difference between torture and interrogation, innocence or guilt, and ultimately life or death, as stated by the Board of National Defense. They can be a powerful tool to gather of a confession, but only if approached correctly and with morals. The only problem is not the accusations, the yelling, the moving in closer, the invading one's space, lying about evidence, making it up, pretending to have evidence, telling someone they failed a polygraph, because that is legal. These characteristics are the foundation of most tactics used in the interrogation room. The real issue lies in the aggressive oppression and the bold antagonism followed by the coercion. As shown in the statistical conclusion, about 27% of the first 325 exonerations, more commonly known as being released for wrongful conviction, were caused by false confessions. It might not sound like a lot, but that is close to 88 cases, in a little over a fourth of these cases. This is why these things need to change. Is completely putting an end to these tactics altogether a practical resolve? Absolutely not. Is changing how we use them to give a more positive outlook for the future? Absolutely. There is no doubt that the psychological confessions used during an interrogation do indeed result through a studied and developed process. These aspects of a successful interrogation create a pressure barrier that causes them to become appealed against their conscience, making them more susceptible to reveal the truth. The science behind this proves that enforcing these tactics to instill fear and angst towards a confession are precise in the aspect of bringing accuracy in catching criminals. They are only effective, though, if used correctly and with a specific process of approach and in the appropriate circumstances. Otherwise, they represent an ethical disconnect between the system and the public, and have been used with the sole wanting of gaining confession in the wrong ways, and creates a fine line between life or death. A confession does not play an intimately essential role in the final decision of a court. For that reason, eliciting true confessions through an ethical and detailed process is important for the justice of all. It is not directly up to us citizens to protect and determine the fate of each of us affected by this wrongful system that we have been dissatisfied with for so long, but it is up to us to hold our law enforcement teams accountable to do so for us. They protect us, we trust them. They betray us, but then we don't. Given the discontent and stagnant ways of our legal system, what would you do?